3 years ago, my life turned upside down in a way I never could have predicted. My ex-wife, Sarah, and I had been divorced for 2 years, and things between us had been, if not friendly, at least functional. We co-parented our 7-year-old daughter, Lily, with what I thought was mutual respect. Sure, we had disagreements, but nothing major, until the day I got served with court papers. Sarah was suing me for full custody. The papers accused me of being an unfit parent, listing claims so exaggerated they bordered on absurd. Neglect? Substance abuse? Unstable living conditions? It was like she'd invented a whole new version of me. I felt blindsided. Up until then, I thought we were on the same page, keeping Lily's well-being as our top priority. The betrayal stung, but I told myself it was just Sarah playing dirty. I wasn't worried at first. Surely the court would see through the lies. But as the hearing date approached, I started to sense this wasn't going to be a straightforward fight. I noticed Sarah was unusually confident, and her lawyer seemed more aggressive than necessary. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then came the day of the first court hearing. I sat at the defendant's table, trying to keep my cool as Sarah's lawyer outlined their case. It was all lies, of course, but hearing those accusations spoken in front of a judge was infuriating. And then it happened. Sarah's lawyer called their first witness, my mom. At first, I thought I'd misheard. My mom? She couldn't be serious. But when I saw her walking to the stand, her expression unreadable, the reality hit me. My stomach dropped. Her testimony started out mild, just general comments about how I'd always been a little irresponsible and not great with money. It stung, but I told myself she was probably trying to help Sarah make her case look balanced. Then her tone shifted, and she began supporting Sarah's claims directly. She said I was unreliable, that I'd missed important moments in Lily's life, and that my apartment was no place to raise a child. Every word felt like a knife to the chest. This wasn't the mom I knew. This wasn't the woman who'd raised me, who'd seen firsthand how much I loved Lily and how hard I worked to provide for her. I wanted to interrupt, to yell, to demand answers, but I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, numb, as my mom became the star witness against me. After the hearing, I confronted her in the hallway. What the hell was that? I demanded, my voice low but shaking with anger. I'm doing what's best for Lily, she said, her tone cold and detached. You need to face reality. Sarah's a better parent, and Lily deserves stability. Her words floored me. My mom, the person I'd always counted on, was siding with Sarah, not because she had to, but because she believed it was the right thing to do. That night, I went home and sat in silence, staring at the walls of my apartment. My world had been turned upside down, and the person I thought would always have my back was now the one leading the charge against me. It wasn't just about the custody battle anymore. It was about trust, family, and betrayal on a scale I never thought I'd experience. And as I sat there, one thought kept running through my mind. How did it come to this? After my mom's testimony, it felt like a grenade had gone off in the middle of our family. The fallout was immediate and messy, with lines being drawn so quickly it made my head spin. My siblings, who had always been a source of stability and comfort, were suddenly divided. Some sided with my mom, parroting her justification that she was only doing what's best for Lily. Others stood firmly with me, horrified by what they saw as a betrayal of not just me, but our family as a whole. Family gatherings turned into war zones. The first one after the hearing was a disaster. It was supposed to be a birthday celebration for my youngest niece, but within minutes of everyone arriving, the tension was palpable. My mom avoided me entirely, keeping to one side of the room while I stayed on the other. Things boiled over when one of my sisters, Natalie, couldn't hold her tongue any longer. How could you do this to him? She demanded, her voice shaking with anger. He's your son, Mom. You're supposed to support him, not tear him down. I am supporting him, my mom snapped back. I'm supporting him by doing what's best for Lily. If he can't see that, maybe he needs to do some soul searching. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Soul searching? I said, my voice rising. You're the one who should be taking a hard look at yourself. You stood up in court and lied about me, about your own son. Do you even realize what you've done? My mom's expression hardened. I didn't lie, she said coldly. I told the truth as I see it. You need to stop playing the victim and start thinking about what's best for your daughter. The argument escalated from there, with my siblings taking sides and shouting over each other until my niece started crying. I left shortly after, my hands shaking with anger and frustration. I tried to confront my mom again a few days later, hoping we could have a calmer conversation one-on-one. I needed to understand how she could justify what she'd done, how she could stand by Sarah and destroy the trust between us. But every conversation ended the same way, with her doubling down on her decision. "I'm doing what's best for Lily," she said over and over, like it was a mantra. "If you can't see that, then I don't know what to tell you." Her words cut me to the core, not because they were true, but because I knew how wrong they were. I wasn't perfect. No parent is, but I was a devoted father. I loved Lily more than anything, and I had always done everything I could to provide for her and keep her safe. The idea that I was somehow unfit to raise her was not only insulting, but it was also flat-out false. One evening, during yet another heated argument, I finally snapped. "Do you even care about me anymore?" I demanded, my voice cracking with emotion. "Because it sure doesn't feel like it." For the first time, my mom hesitated. Her face softened for just a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd gotten through to her. But then she shook her head and said, "This isn't about you, it's about Lily. And if you can't understand that, then maybe you're not as ready to be a parent as you think you are." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I left without saying another word, my heart heavy with the realization that I might never get the answers or the support I was looking for. As the custody battle dragged on, my relationship with my mom disintegrated entirely. I stopped visiting her house, even for family events, because every encounter turned into a fight. I blocked her number after one particularly nasty argument where she accused me of being selfish for putting my pride over Lily's best interests. Cutting her out of my life was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made. Despite everything, she was still my mom, and part of me wanted to believe that we could find a way back to the relationship we'd once had. But the pain of her betrayal was too much, and I couldn't keep allowing her to poison my life. My siblings tried to act as mediators, but their efforts only added to the tension. Those who sided with me were angry at her for tearing the family apart, while those who supported her viewed me as the antagonist for refusing to forgive her. The once tight bond between us all had been fractured, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. In the meantime, I poured all my energy into the custody case and into being the best father I could for Lily. She was my anchor, the reason I kept pushing forward even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. And as much as it hurt to lose my mom, I knew I couldn't compromise when it came to protecting my daughter and fighting for my place in her life. The custody battle was nothing short of a war, a slow, grueling fight where every move felt like a life-or-death decision. Sarah and her lawyer came at me with everything they had. Their strategy was simple: portray me as an irresponsible and unfit father who couldn't provide the stability Lily needed. It started with their opening statement, which painted a picture of me that felt like a stranger. According to Sarah's lawyer, I was a man who struggled to hold down a job, lived in a disorganized and chaotic environment, and failed to prioritize my daughter's well-being. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, and even though I knew the accusations were baseless, it was hard not to feel exposed. Then came the parade of character witnesses. Some were old acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years, while others were people I barely knew. One former co-worker, who I suspect Sarah had bribed, claimed I frequently missed work and was often distracted by personal issues. A neighbor I rarely spoke to described my apartment as unkempt, implying it was an unsuitable place for a child. But the worst part was hearing my mom take the stand again. This time, she doubled down on her claims, recounting exaggerated or outright false stories from my teenage years to paint me as perpetually irresponsible. Hearing her speak so coldly about me, in front of a judge no less, was a wound I didn't think would ever heal. Despite the onslaught, my lawyer and I held our ground. From the beginning, we had agreed on one thing: stick to the facts. There was no need for theatrics or personal attacks. Just the truth, laid out clearly and methodically. The turning point came when we presented my documented evidence. Over the years, I had kept meticulous records of my time with Lily. There were receipts from school supplies and extracurricular activities, photos from trips to the park and family outings, and emails detailing how I had adjusted my work schedule to accommodate her needs. One piece of evidence stood out: a detailed calendar showing every day I had spent with Lily over the past year. It was color-coded, with notes about our activities and any milestone she had reached during our time together. When my lawyer presented it to the court, I saw the judge's expression shift slightly, as if the narrative Sarah had spun was starting to unravel. Sarah's lawyer tried to poke holes in my records, questioning their authenticity and relevance. But the evidence was solid, and for every argument they made, we had a counterpoint. It wasn't flashy, but it was enough to dismantle the false claims they had built their case on. After weeks of back and forth, The day of the final ruling arrived. I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge began to deliver their verdict. After reviewing the evidence and testimony presented by both parties, the judge said, their voice calm but firm, "I find that the father has demonstrated a consistent commitment to the well-being and upbringing of the child. While no parent is without flaws, the court does not find sufficient grounds to grant sole custody to the mother." I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the judge announced their decision: joint custody. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was enough. It meant I could continue to be a central part of Lily's life, just as I had always been. But the victory was bittersweet. As I left the courtroom, my lawyer congratulated me on the outcome, but my thoughts were elsewhere. The fight had taken a toll on me, not just financially, but emotionally. And while I had won the right to be with my daughter, I had lost something equally precious: my relationship with my mom. She didn't look at me as she left the courthouse. I wanted to confront her, to ask if it had been worth it, but I didn't have the energy. Instead, I went home, hugged Lily tighter than ever, and tried to focus on the future. The scars from the battle would stay with me for a long time, but for Lily's sake, I had to move forward. And while the fight for custody was over, the fight to rebuild my life and figure out where my family fit into it was just beginning. In the months following the trial, the dust began to settle, or at least it did for me and Lily. Sarah, however, faced the full fallout of her failed custody battle. The judge's ruling had not only dismissed her claims, but had also included a scathing critique of her unsubstantiated accusations and lack of credible evidence. That line from the official ruling spread quickly, tarnishing her reputation. The financial toll was just as brutal. Sarah had poured tens of thousands of dollars into her legal team, convinced she would come out on top. When the dust cleared, she was left with nothing but debt. She had to downsize her lifestyle drastically, selling her car and moving into a smaller apartment. While I didn't relish her struggles, part of me felt vindicated. She had tried to paint me as an unfit father, and now her lies had come back to haunt her. But Sarah's downfall paled in comparison to what happened to my mom. While Sarah's betrayal had been expected to some extent, she was my ex-wife. After all, my mom's decision to side with her had sent shockwaves through our family and community. It was one thing to stand by a friend. It was another to publicly betray your own child. My mom's estrangement from the family was swift and brutal. My siblings, who had initially been divided, now leaned overwhelmingly in my favor. Even those who had supported her during the trial were appalled once the full extent of her actions came to light. At family gatherings, her name became a sore subject, whispered in hushed tones or avoided entirely. Her social circle shrank as well. Our town wasn't huge, and word of the custody battle, and her role in it, spread quickly. Old friends who once admired her began to keep their distance, unsure how to reconcile the kind, supportive woman they knew with someone who had testified against her own son in court. Even her neighbors, who had always been friendly, grew colder. The older woman who lived next door stopped waving to her in the mornings, and the couple across the street, who used to invite her over for coffee, suddenly became too busy. My mom's life, once full of activity and connections, grew quieter and lonelier by the day. I didn't hear about most of this firsthand. By this point, I had completely cut ties with her. The pain of her betrayal was still too raw, and I had no desire to reopen old wounds. But small-town gossip has a way of reaching you whether you want it to or not. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that my mom had lost her job at the local library, a position she had held for nearly a decade. The official reason was budget cuts, but the timing was suspicious. Some speculated that her tarnished reputation had made her an easy target when the library needed to trim staff. Without her job, my mom began struggling financially. She sold her car to cover her mortgage for a few more months, but eventually, that wasn't enough. A neighbor mentioned seeing a for sale sign go up in front of her house, and not long after, she moved out. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a pang of sadness when I heard these things. No matter how angry I was, she was still my mom, and it hurt to know she was suffering. But every time I considered reaching out, I reminded myself of her cold words during the trial, of the way she had looked me in the eye and told the court I was unfit to raise my daughter. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. As I focused on rebuilding my life with Lily, I tried to put my mom's struggles out of my mind. My priority was my daughter, giving her the stability and love she needed after such a tumultuous time. We developed new routines, spent weekends exploring parks and museums, and started to feel like a team again. Still, there were moments when my mom's absence felt like a weight. I missed the way she used to dote on Lily, the way she used to bake cookies with her on Sunday afternoons. I missed the woman I thought she was before all of this happened. But every time I started to soften, I reminded myself of one simple truth. Forgiveness is earned, not owed. And my mom, for all her pain and struggles, had done nothing to earn it yet. Until she took responsibility for her actions, I couldn't bring myself to take the first step. 2 years had passed since the trial, and I had done everything in my power to move forward. Lily and I had settled into a rhythm that felt like peace. I hadn't spoken to my mom in all that time, not once. I told myself I was fine with it, that I didn't need her in my life. But the truth was, her absence still lingered, like the ghost of a wound that hadn't fully healed. So when I opened my door one rainy afternoon and saw her standing there, I didn't know what to feel. She looked different, thinner, older, and somehow smaller than I remembered. Her clothes hung loosely on her frame, and her once meticulously styled hair was limp and streaked with gray. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she said, her voice trembling, barely audible over the rain. "But I need your help. I've lost everything, and I don't know where else to turn." For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her. A flood of emotions surged through me all at once. Anger, pity, confusion, and somewhere, buried deep, an echo of the love I'd once felt for her. I wanted to slam the door, to tell her she'd made her bed and now she had to lie in it. But I couldn't. "Why are you here?" I asked finally, my voice flat, giving nothing away. Tears welled in her eyes as she hesitated, wringing her hands. I have nowhere else to go," she said. "After the trial, things just kept getting worse. I lost my house, my savings, everything. I've been staying with friends, but they've made it clear I've overstayed my welcome." I could hear the desperation in her voice, and it tugged at something inside me. But the memory of her testimony against me was still vivid in my mind, a fresh wound that no amount of time seemed to heal. "And now you think I'll help you?" I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She flinched, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered how she'd looked at me in court, cold, detached, as if I were a stranger. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said quietly. "But I need help, and you're the only one I can turn to." I wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at me to tell her to leave and never come back. But as I looked at her, soaked from the rain and barely holding herself together, I couldn't deny the weight of the situation. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. The tension inside my apartment was suffocating. She stood awkwardly in the entryway, clutching the strap of a weathered bag. I offered her a towel, and she accepted it with a mumbled thank you, drying her hair and face before sitting down on the edge of the couch. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked, crossing my arms. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for the right words. "I need a place to stay," she said finally. "Just for a little while, until I can get back on my feet." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You must be joking. After everything you did, you think I'm just going to welcome you back into my life like nothing happened?" "I know I don't deserve it," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you, hurt all of us. But I swear I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting Lily." "Protecting Lily?" I snapped. "By trying to take her away from me? By lying about me in court? Do you even hear yourself?" She bowed her head, tears streaming down her face. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I see that now. But I can't change the past. All I can do is ask for a chance to make things right." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me still couldn't trust her. "You don't get to waltz back into my life and ask for forgiveness just because you're out of options," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said, looking up at me with pleading eyes. "I'm asking for a chance. Please." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one who had betrayed me so completely. Finally, I let out a heavy sigh. "You can stay," I said reluctantly. "But this doesn't mean I've forgiven you. And it doesn't mean things are okay between us." "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking with relief. As I showed her to the guest room, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd made the right decision. Letting her back into my life felt like opening an old wound, but part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward healing. The morning after my mom's unexpected arrival, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of coffee. She looked exhausted, as though the weight of the past 2 years had finally caught up with her. For a moment, I hesitated, torn between the instinct to offer comfort and the lingering resentment that simmered beneath the surface. I sat down across from her, saying nothing at first. The silence between us was thick with unspoken tension. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for letting me stay. I know I don't deserve it." "Why are you here, Mom?" I asked bluntly. "What do you want from me?" She sighed, rubbing her temples as if trying to summon the courage to answer. "I don't want anything," she said, though the weariness in her voice told a different story. I don't have anywhere else to go." As the coffee cooled between us, she began to tell her story. Piece by piece, she laid out the extent of her struggles over the past 2 years. She had been laid off from her job at the library shortly after the trial. Officially, it was due to budget cuts, but she suspected her involvement in the custody battle had played a role. Without her steady income, she had quickly fallen behind on her bills. Her house, the home where I'd grown up, had gone into foreclosure 6 months ago. She'd sold most of her belongings trying to stay afloat, but it hadn't been enough. For the past few months, she had been couch surfing, relying on the generosity of friends who were now beginning to lose patience. "I've burned through every favor," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You're the only one left." I listened in silence, my emotions a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. This was my mom. After all, the woman who had raised me, who had once been my greatest source of comfort. But another part of me couldn't forget the pain she'd caused me during the trial, the way she'd looked me in the eye and testified against me without a second thought. "Why now?" I asked finally, my voice low but steady. "Why come to me after everything you've done?" She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the edge of her sweater. Tears welled up in her eyes, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Because I didn't know where else to go," she said. "And because I made mistakes. I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, but I see now how much I hurt you. I want to make things right, if you'll let me." Her words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. For the first time, I saw a flicker of the woman she used to be. The mom who had cheered at my soccer games, who had stayed up late helping me with school projects, who had been my rock in moments of doubt. But that flicker wasn't enough to erase the scars she'd left behind. "What exactly do you mean by making things right?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She flinched but held my gaze. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know I can't change the past, but I want to try to fix what I can. I know I can't undo what I did in court, but I want to be here for you, for Lily. I want to rebuild our relationship, even if it takes the rest of my life." Her words stirred something in me, a cautious hope, tinged with skepticism. I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down. "It's not that simple," I said finally. "You can't just say you're sorry and expect everything to go back to the way it was." "I know," she said, tears spilling over now. "But I'm willing to try, no matter how long it takes." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, to protect myself from more pain. But another part, the part that still remembered the love we used to share, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the first step towards something better. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "Not yet. But if you're serious about fixing this, I'm willing to try." Her shoulders sagged with relief, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. After our emotional conversation over coffee, I knew I couldn't let my mom simply waltz back into my life without addressing the damage she had caused. If she truly wanted to rebuild our relationship, it would have to be on my terms. That meant not just apologizing, but actively taking responsibility for her actions and proving that she was willing to change. The next morning, I laid it out for her as plainly as I could. "If you're serious about fixing this," I said, sitting across from her in the living room, "there are conditions." She nodded hesitantly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I understand," she said, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The first condition was simple, though not easy. She had to acknowledge what she had done. Not just the act of testifying against me, but the ripple effects it had caused on my life, my relationships, and my ability to trust her. "I need you to understand how much you hurt me," I told her. "And I need to know that you regret it, not just because of what it cost you, but because of what it did to me and Lily." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I do regret it," she said. "I regret it more than you know. I thought I was helping, but I see now that I was wrong. I betrayed you, and I'll never forgive myself for that." The second condition was that she had to prove her commitment to change. Words weren't enough. I needed to see her follow through with actions. This included being there for Lily, not as a way to earn brownie points, but because Lily deserved a grandmother who was present and reliable. "If you want to be in Lily's life," I said, "you have to show up for her." No excuses, no half measures. I can do that, she said, her voice steadier this time. I want to be there for her. For both of you. Finally, I told her that we would have to work through the past together, no matter how painful it was. This meant having honest, sometimes uncomfortable conversations about what had happened and why. I'm not going to hold back, I warned her. If we're going to do this, you need to be ready to hear the truth, even if it hurts. She hesitated but then nodded. I'm ready, she said quietly. Over the next few weeks, we had several of those long, difficult conversations. At first, they were strained and awkward, both of us struggling to navigate the emotional minefield between us. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told her exactly how her betrayal had made me feel, how it had shaken the foundation of trust I'd built with her over a lifetime. She didn't defend herself or try to justify her actions, which was a welcome change from the combative stance she had taken during the trial. Instead, she listened, really listened. For the first time in years, I felt like she was hearing me, not just the words, but the pain behind them. There were moments when she broke down, tears streaming down her face as she apologized again and again. I can't undo what I did, she said during one particularly emotional conversation. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you if you'll let me. Slowly, I began to see glimpses of the mom I used to know. She started showing up for Lily in small but meaningful ways, offering to babysit when I had to work late, helping with school projects, and even attending Lily's soccer games. These weren't grand gestures, but they felt sincere, and Lily seemed to thrive with her grandmother back in her life. For me, the process was slower. Forgiveness didn't come easily, and there were days when the old anger resurfaced, threatening to pull me back into the bitterness I'd worked so hard to move past. But every time I saw her make an effort, every time she listened without defensiveness or showed up for Lily without being asked, I felt a little of the wall between us start to crumble. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, and I knew it never would be. The scars from her betrayal would always be there, a reminder of what we had lost. But for the first time in years, I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe we couldn't go back to the way things were, but maybe we could build something new. And for now, that was enough. A few months into our tentative reconciliation, my mom surprised me in a way I hadn't expected. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was packing up my work bag when she approached me in the kitchen. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Why don't you let me babysit Lily tonight? You deserve a break. Go out. Do something for yourself." The offer caught me off guard. I couldn't remember the last time she had volunteered to take care of Lily, let alone suggested I take some time for myself. For a moment, I hesitated. Could I trust her with something so important? But then I saw the sincerity in her eyes, the quiet determination that told me this wasn't just about babysitting. This was her way of trying to rebuild the trust she had shattered. "Are you sure?" I asked, my tone cautious. She nodded. "Positive. I'd love to spend some time with her. And you need this." "Really?" Reluctantly, I agreed. That evening, I dropped Lily off at the house and spent the next couple of hours nervously checking my phone, half expecting a disaster. But when I returned, my worries melted away. Lily was waiting for me at the door, her face lit up with excitement. "Daddy, guess what?" she exclaimed, tugging at my hand. "Grandma and I made cookies, and she taught me a new card game. I won 3 times." Her joy was infectious, and as she chattered about their evening, I found myself smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. My mom stood nearby, watching us with a soft, almost hesitant expression. "She's such a bright kid," she said quietly. "You're doing a great job with her." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it meant a lot coming from her. For the first time in years, it felt like she was truly seeing me, not as an adversary, but as a father doing his best. Moments like these reminded me why I was giving her a second chance. It wasn't just about the past. It was about the future, about the possibility of rebuilding something meaningful for Lily's sake, as well as my own. But while I appreciated her efforts, I was careful not to let my guard down completely. The pain of her betrayal still lingered, a constant reminder that trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. I made it clear to her that forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting. "You're doing better," I told her one evening after Lily had gone to bed. "But this doesn't erase what happened. If you want to stay in my life, you have to keep showing up. No shortcuts, no excuses." "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not going anywhere. I'll keep proving myself, no matter how long it takes." Her words felt genuine, but I still couldn't ignore the nagging doubts in the back of my mind. It wasn't that I didn't want to forgive her. I did. But forgiveness, I had learned, was a process, not a single act. In the months that followed, my mom continued to show up in small but meaningful ways. She became a consistent presence in Lily's life, helping with homework, cheering at soccer games, and even taking her on occasional outings. Lily adored her, and seeing them bond brought a warmth to my heart that I hadn't felt in years. Still, I couldn't ignore the limits of my forgiveness. There were moments when old wounds resurfaced, when I'd catch myself remembering the things she said in court or the way she had chosen Sarah's side without hesitation. But each time, I reminded myself of the progress we were making. Rebuilding our relationship wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding a way to move forward despite it. And while I didn't know what the future held, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we were heading in the right direction. As I cautiously worked to rebuild my relationship with my mom, I couldn't ignore the steady unraveling of Sarah's life. Her world, once so carefully curated, seemed to collapse piece by piece. The first blow had come shortly after the custody trial. The judge's scathing remarks about her unsubstantiated claims had tarnished her reputation in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her employers, who had once admired her as a confident and competent professional, began to view her differently. It didn't take long for her to lose her job, officially due to budget cuts, though I suspected her courtroom antics had played a role. With no steady income, Sarah struggled to keep up with her mortgage payments and other expenses. Within a year, she had to sell her house, downsizing to a modest apartment in a less desirable part of town. Her social circle, which had once been large and vibrant, dwindled to a handful of acquaintances. Many of her friends distanced themselves, wary of the bitterness that now seemed to consume her. Through it all, I tried to shield Lily from the worst of it. Despite Sarah's struggles, Lily still loved her mom deeply. To her, Sarah was the fun parent, the one who let her stay up late and eat ice cream for dinner. But as much as I wanted to preserve that image for Lily's sake, Sarah's behavior made it increasingly difficult. Her bitterness often bled into her interactions with Lily. She would make offhand comments about me, planting seeds of doubt in Lily's mind. "Your dad's lucky I don't take you away from him," she said once, only for Lily to recount it tearfully later. Other times, Sarah's mood swings left Lily confused and hurt. I found myself having difficult conversations with Lily more often than I'd like. "Why is Mom so angry?" she asked one night, her big eyes full of worry. I knelt down to her level, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups have a lot going on inside that they don't know how to handle," I explained. "It doesn't mean she doesn't love you, but it's not your job to fix it, okay?" She nodded slowly, though I could tell she didn't fully understand. How could she? She was just a kid caught in the crossfire of adult problems. Through it all, my mom became an unexpected source of support. It was ironic, really. After years of being part of the problem, she was now helping me navigate one of the most challenging parts of parenting. When Sarah tried to stir up drama, my mom stepped in, defusing situations with a calmness I hadn't seen from her in years. "Let me take Lily for the afternoon," she offered once after Sarah had dropped her off in tears following an argument. "You need a break, and she needs some time to just be a kid." I was hesitant at first, but Lily returned from those afternoons with my mom happier and more relaxed. It was clear that my mom was making an effort, not just with me, but with Lily as well. More than that, she became someone I could talk to. On nights, when the stress of co-parenting with Sarah felt overwhelming, my mom would sit with me at the kitchen table, listening as I vented. She didn't try to fix things or offer platitudes. She just listened, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had an ally. Her support didn't erase the past, but it did help me feel less alone. And as I watched her bond with Lily and step into a more positive role in our lives, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. Sarah's downfall was hard to watch, even after everything she had done. But my focus was on Lily, on giving her the stability and love she needed to thrive. And with my mom's help, I started to feel like I was finally getting it right. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that's happened, it's hard to believe how much my life has changed since the day Sarah blindsided me with that custody lawsuit. What started as one of the darkest chapters of my life ultimately became a journey of growth, resilience, and hard-earned wisdom. The first and perhaps most difficult lesson I learned was the importance of boundaries. Before all this, I had always tried to be the peacemaker, the one who avoided conflict and kept the peace, even at my own expense. But the custody battle forced me to realize that there are times when you have to draw a line, even with the people you love. Standing up to Sarah, and more painfully, to my mom, wasn't easy. It meant confronting my fears of being seen as the bad guy and risking relationships that had once been central to my life. But in doing so, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. I learned that protecting myself and Lily wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Forgiveness, I found, is a complicated thing. It's not a one-time act, nor is it something that can be forced or rushed. Rebuilding my relationship with my mom taught me that forgiveness is a process, one that requires effort on both sides. There were times when I wondered if I was doing the right thing by giving her a second chance. The scars from her betrayal ran deep, and some days, it felt easier to shut her out completely. But as I watched her show up for Lily, as I saw her own regret and determination to change, I realized that people are capable of growth if they're willing to face their mistakes. Our relationship isn't perfect. It probably never will be. But the effort she's put in has shown me that she values our bond enough to fight for it. And that in itself is worth something. Sarah, on the other hand, is a different story. For a long time, I carried around a heavy anger toward her, replaying the moments when she had tried to tear me down and take Lily away from me. But over time, I realized that holding on to that anger wasn't hurting her. It was only hurting me. Letting go wasn't about condoning what she did. It was about freeing myself from the weight of resentment so I could focus on what truly mattered, giving Lily the best life possible. Sarah's actions were her own, and she'll have to live with the consequences of them. My job is to be the steady, loving presence that Lily needs, no matter what chaos Sarah brings into our lives. The custody battle, as painful as it was, taught me that strength doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes, strength is about standing firm in your values, even when it feels like the world is against you. Sometimes, it's about letting go of the things you can't control and focusing on what you can. Looking at Lily now, I know all the pain and struggle was worth it. She's growing into a bright, compassionate, and resilient young girl, and I'd like to think that the stability I've worked so hard to provide has played a part in that. She loves her mom, despite everything, and I've made peace with the fact that my role isn't to control the relationship, but to support her through it. My mom is still a work in progress, but so am I. Rebuilding trust takes time, and while we'll never go back to the way things were, we're creating something new, something that feels honest and real. In the end, this experience didn't just teach me about boundaries, forgiveness, and resilience. It taught me about myself, about the kind of father, son, and person I want to be. And while I wouldn't wish this journey on anyone, I'm grateful for the lessons it brought. They've made me stronger, and for that, I am thankful.